12 to 8. In light of recent anti-Semitic attacks and growing concerns about the safety of our Jewish communities here in Australia, one of Australia's most prominent Jewish leaders has called for the establishment of a joint counter-terrorism task force. Co-chief executive of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, Alex Rivkin, has unveiled a 15-point plan to declare a national emergency and is also calling for improved law enforcement training, education on anti-Semitism in our schools, and stricter regulations on universities and religious groups that promote hate. Alex Rivkin is on the line and he's speaking with us right now. Alex, good morning.
Good morning, Rod.
Look, we've seen some abhorrent examples of anti-Semitic activity and even thwarted terrorist attacks. How effective do you think a joint terrorism task force would be, considering what we already have in place?
Well, look, I think it would make the country better equipped to deal with what we're facing, both the sorts of actions that we've seen in terms of firebombings of civilian targets, but also the terror threat that we may not know publicly, but which our security services are acutely aware of. Mike Burgess, the Director General of ASIO, very recently said that anti-Semitic terror attacks are the number one priority for ASIO. And that's based on what's happening, but also based on intel which they're receiving. So if we create a national task force to amalgamate all the efforts of the state police, of the federal police, of all the different agencies, bodies, departments that are dealing with this issue, I think it will lead to far better flow of information and better outcomes. And that's something that's been identified by people like Mike Pezzullo, the former Secretary of the Department of Home Affairs. There's a lot of goodwill and a lot of good efforts being put in by police forces and various government departments, but until it's amalgamated and put under a single minister, you're going to have missing information, you're going to have inefficiency. So I think this is the best way to grapple with the problem we're facing.
Yeah. New South Wales Police Deputy Commissioner Dave Hudson says these attacks are being perpetrated by a very limited number of people. But surely we're seeing a wave of hate against Jewish people, and so much so that many Jewish people seem to be just failing to admit their Jewish identity. That just shows the level of fear in the Jewish community.
It's kind of going both ways, Ron. I mean, I'm seeing in my community a great deal of pride in being Jewish, and historically, whenever the Jewish community has faced such intense anti-Semitism, and it's not merely the firebombings, obviously the high-profile incidents that we've all seen and had reported, the nurses incident at Bankstown, but it's also, a daily impact on Jewish life where people face abuse in the streets, people are pushed out of industries, particularly in the creative industries and the arts. The things are going on in universities and schools, but one reaction has been to double down in terms of Jewish identification and pride and connection to the community. But some people are feeling fearful, no doubt about it, and there are a lot of painful conversations taking place in Jewish homes about things like the future of the Jewish community in this country, about whether it's safe to identify, whether it's safe to wear a Jewish head covering or a star-emblemated necklace. And when you have one segment of the population fearful of merely showing who they are, that shows a real failure of Australian democracy and multiculturalism, and it's something which we need to correct.
Yeah. Look, it's easy to talk about community-wide concerns, but when it gets personal and we hear about personal stories, that takes it to a whole other level. Now, a former home that you lived in was targeted, and it's presumed that you were actually the target of that. Give us your personal experience and that of your family.
Look, it was a horrific thing to wake up to. My family would return from holidays in Brisbane, and the following morning were woken up very early in the morning, about 4 or 5 in the morning, by surveillance video taken from our former neighbours across the street, showing this inferno, this great blaze of cars and red paint splashed on our former home. And it hit very personally because this was a place where we'd lived for 5 years. It was a very cherished place for us, and to know that we were targeted in that way, and it led to some very difficult conversations. My young daughters asking why that was the case, why we were targeted, are we safe in our homes? And to be honest, I wasn't really able to answer those questions. I didn't want to frighten them, I didn't want to add to their concern, but I didn't want to mislead them either. But at the same time, it was a deeply personal incident, but I also treated it as just another anti-Semitic attack on the community, because even though I was the apparent target, I was targeted not because of anything that I've done personally. It's because of what I represent and what I stand for, which is the fight against anti-Semitism, the pride in being Jewish, the determination to weed out this hatred that's in our midst, and that's why I was targeted. So really, it's an attack on the Jewish community, it's an attack on our ability to speak up and be proud about who we are. And if the attempt was to silence me and prevent the Jewish community from speaking up, at least that failed dismally, I can tell you.
Look, we're talking about this wave of hate against the Jewish people, and you're calling for anti-Semitic education to be included in school curriculums. What specific topics and approaches would you take in that?
Well, we've had Holocaust education as part of the national curriculum for some time, and that's a good thing. The study of the Holocaust allows us to understand this process of hatred, of dehumanization, which leads to such persecution and ultimately destruction of entire races of people. And there are so many stories in the Holocaust of cowardice, of evil, of goodness that need to be understood. But at the same time, if we only learn about anti-Semitism through the prism of the Holocaust, it gives this kind of distorted picture that anti-Semitism is something that belongs to Europe last century, something that occurred 80 years ago and that isn't relevant to the here and now. But as we've seen, anti-Semitism is rampant and it's alive and it's affecting us. And in many ways, the same process of stereotyping, of conspiracy theories, of mythology that's wrapped around the Jewish people that leads people to view the Jews as being lesser people and people deserving of such hatred and violence, it's still with us. So we want to see the Holocaust education reinforced by some specific education about anti-Semitism, for people to understand those myths and conspiracy theories about Jewish power and Jewish greed and Jew loyalties. These are the things that allow horrible people to manipulate the masses. And if we can debunk these myths, show people what they really are, and the foolishness and sinister nature of them, I think people won't be manipulated by them, and we'll have a much more rational and harmonious society.
It's very hard to specifically, that's what we're seeing in Sydney at the moment, the anti-Semitic attacks, but surely we have to broaden out that sort of education to all races, all religions that are here in Australia in what is supposed to be a multicultural society.
Certainly, and there's a merit in teaching basic decency and humanity and judging people by their character and their behaviour, not their skin colour or the shape of their eyes. But at the same time, we need to recognise that anti-Semitism, it's a little bit different. It doesn't fit within the normal analysis of racism. Racism typically depicts people who are different, who look different, as being inferior, loathsome. But anti-Semitism works in a really different way, because the Jews can be depicted as being superior and cunning and malevolent and scheming and devilish. They can be depicted as being all-controlling, all-powerful, sinister. All of these things which aren't really cast on any other people. So there is certainly value in treating, and teaching decent behaviour and having a harmonious society. But we also need to understand the unique elements of anti-Semitism. Otherwise, it's forgotten and it's missed.
One of the big issues is the rise of anti-Semitism, particularly in our universities. What changes do we need to make there, even, when it comes down to making people accountable? What legal changes? What sort of things have we got to do to reduce that swing in our universities?
Well, we saw in the last kind of year, 18 months, a really pervasive dark culture that permeates through the university campuses. And the fact that you had encampments, the fact that you had these fringe activist extremists effectively holding parts of university grounds, taking over whole buildings, making them unsafe for the vast majority of students who just want to get on with their lives and socialise and learn. There's no reason why anyone should be camping on university grounds. And the universities, in response to this threat, took a very weak response. They were ambivalent. They hoped the whole thing would fizzle out, but it didn't. And so there should be a national ban on encampments. There should be a ban also on students storming the lectures of their classmates in the way that has been happening again in the last 18 months. No one has the right to disrupt the education of someone else. There also needs to be an inquiry into foreign funding of student protests and the role of outsiders, people who are not engaged in the university campus, using the university to stoke hatred and division. So we want to make universities once again a place of learning and education where people can be safe and free to go about their business everywhere.
I'm sorry, Alex, I've got to go to the news right now. Thank you so much for coming on and speaking with us this morning. I appreciate it very much. Alex Rivchin there, he's the co-executive of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry.